In lesson 1.4 here, we're going to take a look at some common microgreens crops. So let's look at some of the stuff that I think you might be most familiar with. I often start with sunflower shoots. I think partially because it's the first crop that I worked with, it seems the obvious choice as a microgreen, and it's something I see that a lot of other people are growing. It's very popular with consumers, it's high yielding, it's nutritious, and it's very tasty. It's actually, as a food, is one of the most wonderful foods to eat. And if you're producing it yourself, it's also going to be one of the freshest foods you can eat. Pea shoots are another common crop, and another reason both peas and sunnies are so popular is they're quite easy to grow. They certainly have their idiosyncrasies, but once you get into a routine, they grow very well. Nice thing about both of these is they can also grow in a variety of conditions. Sunnies prefer the heat and peas like it pretty cool, but you can grow the two together if you find just the right environment. The brassicas, which are actually part of the mustard family, is a very, very popular group of crops. So when you get things like kale and kohlrabi and broccoli, there's all sorts of brassicas, and then you get into things like arugula, the Asian vegetables like bok choy and gailan. These are some of the more popular, finer microgreens, and there are literally dozens of them that you can grow. So they're a little more delicate than the peas and sunnies and prefer cool weather, but they're generally very productive and quite reliable. Buckwheat is another interesting crop. We don't often think of fresh eating with buckwheat. It's often ground into flour, but it's very fast growing. It can grow in about 6 to 7 days in hot conditions, and it's often got a real tangy flavor that chefs really like. I find it a little bland myself, but if customers want it, then I will certainly grow it. Radish is another popular crop. You can see why maybe with this shot here is that there are lots of different types that you can blend together, and this one is a purple and green mix that was very, very popular. The nice thing about radish that differentiates it from a lot of the other crops as well is that it's got a bit of kick to it. And so it's also something that mixes really well with other microgreens. At the farmer's market, a mix of the sunflower shoots and the radish was one of our biggest sellers. And even though not technically a microgreen, wheatgrass is quite common as well. And the reason I group it in here is because it grows in very much the same manner and in the same system. And it's one of those crops that you might naturally be able to include in your system. This is particularly good for people who are into juicing. So if you have some local juice bars that have some demand for wheatgrass, that's going to do you very well. It's a very easy crop to grow, and the seed is quite inexpensive. So if you're managing that crop well, you can get a pretty good return. Overall, there are dozens, in fact hundreds of different types of microgreens crops. I wanted to start with some more common ones here. And as you explore this workshop and other materials, you're going to see there's a lot of stuff to grow. Basically, almost any vegetable that you can grow, it could be grown into a microgreens as well. Things like onions, basil, cilantro, different herbs, and corn is an interesting one that you grow completely in the dark. And once it's ready, it's almost like eating sugar. So there's a lot of stuff that's really worth exploring. One of the rules I have developed about how I choose a crop is how long its life cycle is. And generally, I will not grow anything that has a life cycle any more than 12 days. And the reason being is the food peddler system has very, very limited space. And so we need to be able to do a quick crop turnover. And if stuff goes into the 13 or 14 day or longer growth period, it's taking up too much real estate. It takes up too much space for too long. And the price either needs to go way, way up or the return is going to go way, way down. So that's something we look for. It's why I started off with the list of crops I did, because they all grow on that cycle. Stuff like onions and basil, they're much slower growing. And so getting a good return on them relative to the real estate they take can be very, very difficult. So those are some of the more common microgreens crops, but I do hope you explore other options to see what you like growing and what's going to meet your customer demands in the end.